And earlier on in my career, I tried, and I was really bad at it, so I've stopped. It's very difficult to figure out when all the stars align and politicians, together with industry, can sort of push forward, the approval of gaming and in the right way. So I've surrendered on figuring that out. What I can tell you is it will happen. And when it will happen, I don't know. I think there was encouragement that it could happen before the end of May. Then recently, it was doubtful. There's a lot of encouragement that it could happen through the fall session. And we'll see. But I can tell you that the economics make it for a market that could be very successful for gaming at very significant investment levels. We've heard LBS talk about, $10 billion all in. We've heard Mr. Wen say he'd be willing to spend more than he's spending in Cotai. So there's clearly, and others too. So there's clearly the demand, and the investments pencil out. Now there's some parts that need to be analyzed, like tax rates, and obviously the total size of these investments. So Japan's high on the list.
Okay. Martin, you were there in Tokyo. What was your impression?
It was an interesting couple of days because the first day started off with the parliamentarians in the very first talk and was followed immediately after by some very high-powered representatives of the US gaming companies, as well as Tomorazi, of course, from Solaire and Bloomberry. The initial impression I got through the translator, of course, because one has to be careful about nuance, but the initial impression I got was that the parliamentarians were quite reasonably confident that they could get some kind of resolution in time to submit the legislation before the end of this month to the lower house. As the day continued, however, and into the second day with the increasing number of Japanese interests, such as local politicians, engineers from Osaka, it became increasingly clear, however, that the system is actually much more complicated than many of us had been led to believe. And by the end of the conference, it was looking pretty unlikely that the legislation is going to pass in time. But nonetheless, I got the very strong impression that there's a lot of positivity among the participants. And the idea I had was maybe it's about time that those who are looking to develop these casinos either in Tokyo, Osaka, or Hokkaido, or Okinawa, or anywhere else, decouple the narrative from the Olympic Games. Because if anything, the Olympic Games is going to be a deterrent, in particularly for construction in Tokyo. We were also warned about potential labour shortages in regions. Apparently, I couldn't possibly verify this, but the damage to the east coast of Japan 3 years ago because of the tsunami has resulted in certain labour shortages in certain construction projects. In any case, the take-home message was positive, but maybe the idea now is to make the job done well instead of done quickly.
Okay, so
I'll add one thing, and not specifically about Japan, but in the United States, when we saw gaming expand, we basically, it always expanded because your neighbor had it. Tax revenues were going away from your state to your neighbor's state. And I think as gaming expands in Asia, and one country does it, and here I would give it a different dimension. I mean, it's tax dollars, but it's also tourism dollars. And as those tourism dollars begin to go to other places, I think these countries like Japan are going to have to very seriously, look at what they're losing. And it's usually that drives the final push to get it legalized.
yeah, look, I think I agree with that. Tax arbitraging is probably a different issue in this context, largely because the market is so large that tax arbitrages probably aren't as important. And the best example of that is Macau. A 35% tax rate is high by any measure, and it's high by comparison to nearby geographies. But it doesn't seem to have had a great offsetting impact in Macau. Let's talk about Macau a little more, because I guess any examination of the landscape needs to take account of that. Martin, table caps, in particular the table cap that the Secretary for Economy and Finance has indicated will continue. Do you think that with another 2,500 odd tables, it will still be a supply-constrained market?
Well, we were talking about this just now. There's an element of a trick question to this in the sense that even with another 2,500 tables in the market, maybe we should first talk about what the market has now, which is 5,500 plus a certain amount since the cap came into force. Is the market already constrained in supply terms? One thing we can see from the response of operators to the introduction of a cap is a very creative and very nimble way of developing new ways of extracting maximum revenue from the tables on the floor, be it from, I don't know, arranging the tables in different ways or inventing new types of games like fast action baccarat. There are also existing ways that tables make more money than perhaps a piece of paper might tell you, with 3 or 4 people standing behind the table in rows, betting enormous amounts. And of course, if you walk through a number of the properties in any given weekday, there will often be many, many tables that are simply turned off and quiet. In the future, as the tables increase in number, whether or not it can be described as a supply problem, I'm not sure, but I think if we look back to the reasons why the cap was introduced in the first place, of course, not being an insider like yourself, David, I can't be quite certain about the exact real reasons as opposed to some of the stated reasons, but we can be sure of this, and that is that any supply constraint will be very useful for the government in terms of controlling problems with labour and in terms of the backlash, ongoing backlash against the government because of fearful Macau residents who fear that their jobs are going to be cut or are going to have their wages undone by the introduction of foreign labour. And by having a cap of some nature on this sensitive section of labour, the government will actually be protecting itself vis-à-vis the local population. And